And welcome to BEMA's DogEar Festival, our last presentation for the day. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please silence your cell phones and that food and drink is allowed in the auditorium this afternoon. And now we'd like to begin our land acknowledgement. In 1854, Chief Seattle said, "Every part of the soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished." BEMA would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish people of clear salt water, or the Suquamish. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the land and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Thank you so much for listening. The DogEar Festival is sponsored by Partners in Print, Bainbridge History Museum, the Vera Project, Public Display Art, BEMA's Prison Programs, the City of Bainbridge Island, Kitsap County, Washington, and the Bushwick Book Club, Seattle. We'd also like to give a big thanks to our members who allow us to remain a free museum open every single day, and folks like you who come out and support the arts. And now I'd like to invite Catherine, curator of the Cynthia Sears Artist Book Collection, to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. I'm just going to jump in and tell you a little bit about our next presenter. Jenie Gao is a full-time artist, creative director, and entrepreneur. They run an anti-gentrification arts business specializing in printmaking, public art, social practice, and community storytelling. They consult for cultural organizations and the public sector on equity and ethics. Jenie pulls from personal and professional experiences as a second-generation Taiwanese, Chinese American, queer woman of color, and descendant of working-class immigrants. Prior to founding their business, Jenie worked in the museum industry, public education, and manufacturing sectors. Through their cross-section of experiences, Jenie has become attuned to issues of artist labor, cultural power, and institutional accountability. They run a paid apprenticeship program and have thus far mentored 25 emerging artists. I know, it's amazing. Jenie has a BFA in printmaking, drawing from Washington University in St. Louis, and an MFA from Emily Carr University of Art and Design. Jenie's work has been exhibited, collected, and published in the US, Canada, UK, Argentina, Denmark, Germany, and more. It's an incredible list of accomplishments that goes on, documenting Jenie's success and vision as an artist. I found it just incredibly inspiring and educational. I first came across Jenie on a website featuring one of their artist books. I was intrigued by the title, 3 Generations Happy Family, as a takeout menu styled artist book. I had not seen a takeout menu converted into an artist book before, and you all know I have seen a lot of artist books. 3 Generations Happy Family is part 1 of the Me Uncooked Rice series on representational disparities in the U.S. arts industry. It's about the unfolding emotional and personal core for why this data matters, to reveal that underneath the numbers are people's lives. You can see it on display upstairs in the Pfefferman Gallery, and another of their titles, For Daddy, is on display in the Sherry Grover Gallery. And if you watch the video loop in the Sherry Grover Gallery, you'll get to see every page of For Daddy. It's just a lovely book of memories about animals in their family, and I do try to go in there and turn the page now and then. Studying Jenie's website and links therein, I became awestruck by their commitment to the arts as a creator, teacher, and mentor, but always in a context of social justice, equity, the naturalness, and I would say necessity of creativity, and the importance of vision. Jenie is also a skilled storyteller, and if you go to Jenie's website, you'll see that there's a link to a TEDx talk that Jenie did some time ago. So now let's welcome Jenie Gao.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that warm welcome. And I just have to say to the BIMA staff and to Cynthia, everybody here's so nice. You know, just any question that I have, or even things I haven't thought of that I needed. Cherie, Sarah, Catherine, all of you, thank you so much for giving me such a warm welcome here. So hello, everyone. My name is Jenie Gao. I am a second-generation Taiwanese and Chinese American. And since 2014, I have run a full-time anti-gentrification arts business specializing in printmaking, public art, social practice, and community storytelling. I also consult for cultural organizations and the public sector on equity and ethics. And I currently live on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh in what is known as Vancouver, British Columbia. So thank you for being here and sharing space with me. So the staff here at Bainbridge Island Museum of Art invited me to give a talk about artists, communities, and creativity after they watched my TEDx talk, which I gave almost 9 years ago. In my TEDx talk, I presented an argument that creativity is a survival skill, and that when we as a people genuinely support creativity, we thrive. Conversely, when we live in a society that suppresses or exploits our creativity, it doesn't just go away. Our creativity instead then becomes part of the social and systemic problems that consume and destroy us. So today, I would like to build on this argument that creativity is a survival skill with another persistent question that I have been grappling with. Is it possible to create ethical and honest work in the context of colonial systems in a nation that was built on a foundation of enslavement, exploitation, and stolen land? If creativity is indeed necessary for our survival, then what will genuine reclamation of our authorship require? I wish to begin by recognizing what we are up against in 2025. Researcher Kimberly Crenshaw describes how Black women are often rendered invisible in both conversations about race and in conversations about gender. Black women exist at an intersection outside of the frame of most people's comprehension. And so part of the work of social justice is to create frameworks of comprehension to make ourselves capable of seeing what otherwise gets excluded. Because we're here in the arts, the first framework that I offer is the false dichotomy of the starving artist versus artist for the elite. People are very familiar with the stereotype of the starving artist, and yet at the same time, many people hold the subconscious beliefs that art is expensive, that museums are exclusive, and that art is only for people who are wealthy. So how do we reconcile this? How can starving artists exist in the same world where having access to the arts and having access to museums is seen as a marker of wealth and privilege? Disrupting this contradiction lies in the semantics. The artist or the laborer is starving, yet the art, the property that the artist creates, is valuable. The archetype of the starving artist hides in plain sight one of the most fundamental tenets of colonial systems, which is the separation of the laborer from the asset. And so part of the work of repair is reimagining what types of systems will make it possible to reconnect the person with the value of what they create. The second framework that I'd like to offer you is that of representation and how we use it responsibly. We've been told that representation matters, but earlier this week, for Trans Day of Visibility, many people circulated the saying that visibility without protection is a trap. The arts industry often offers people exposure in lieu of payment, but what are the risks of being exposed? And is the arts industry prepared to protect and stand up for people that this industry makes visible? So this is the crux of the problem that I have found as a queer femme of color working in the arts and someone who is part of a demographic that is less than 0.5% of the work collected by U.S. museums and arts institutions. And so that's all women, femmes, gender nonconforming people of color, all in that 0.5%, regardless of their ethnic background. And so we need our stories to exist. And the existing systems and institutions are designed to extract from us in a way that co-opts and dishonors our stories. So the question for any of us who are working with institutions is, beyond the exposure of being seen, what is happening on an organizational level to protect the marginalized people we work with, to build genuine relationships with artists and the communities that they represent, and to responsibly steward the legacy of artists' work. As a researcher, I use an approach called auto theory, which is the connecting of personal lived experience with larger socio-political systems. I reject the Western idea of the outside objective researcher. I am not an anthropologist, and I don't study groups that are foreign to me. I contextualize myself as a community member who is implicated in, impacted by, and socially responsible for the work that I put forward. In my current ongoing body of work entitled The Negotiation Table, I take hand-carved wood blocks and, after printing the additions, transform the blocks into sculptural installations in a new purpose. I use the medium of printmaking and its assimilation into the fine arts as a metaphor for larger societal systems. Historically, print as an invention made it possible to digitize information and communicate with the masses. Printmaking has played a crucial role in political campaigning, protests, and community organizing. But like most technologies, print was replaced with newer innovations, and traditional printmaking techniques have since been stewarded by the fine arts. To stay relevant and compete against high art forms such as painting, print needed to become artificially rare. And it became best practice in printmaking to destroy the plates to limit the addition of prints. Now, I've always been uncomfortable with this practice of destroying evidence of the labor in favor of rarefying the asset, while also feeling a deep resonance with the philosophies of printmaking as a medium. As a second-generation Taiwanese Chinese American, I also have felt that printmaking is an apt metaphor for the Asian American experience of being caught between resistance and assimilation, of striving for limited social benefits while never truly being equal, and of being a person made artificially rare in white-dominant institutions by a history of exclusionary policies. And so these would be policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Taiwan Magnuson Act, and the recent dismantling of affirmative action. And it's particularly for my family, who came after the end of these exclusionary policies, we're people who were blocked and even separated as family members because of these policies. And so I am a limited edition. I am part of a racialized quota. And the table has become one of the frameworks for how I engage with these topics. As an artist and organizer, my work moves from the studio work table to the boardroom conference table to the family dining table, and I've often thought about what it means to take a seat at the table. The table is a gathering space imbued with social and political significance. It contains the promise of inclusion and decision-making, contingent upon an invitation. The invitation suggests that power is conditional, and just as it can be granted, it can be taken away. And so this fear of losing an invitation is often what prevents people from taking difficult stances that could protect other people, even when they have the opportunity to do so. So via the Negotiation Table series, I ask, how do we reconstruct space itself, the space that surrounds the decisions, the invitations, and the stories that inform us? An ethic as a route is an installation that navigates how we arrive at our ethics. The central image in this installation is a map of my migration route, from where I was born in Kansas City, to each of my homes in the Midwest US, to my current home in Vancouver, British Columbia. I decided to make water instead of land the geographic anchor, with the Great Lakes blooming at the top of the map. And the map is oriented with the roots growing downward in defiance of the colonial directions. My mother still resides in my last childhood home in rural Kansas, where she is constantly targeted by predatory realtors. Agricultural runoff and nearby suburban development have made the soil poor. The land around my mother's house erodes regularly and floods when it rains. Yet the iris flower continues to grow here. Irises are known for growing in places with polluted water, effectively removing toxins and holding the soil together. And so this is an image of my artist book, Dear Ma Ethic, which is here in the Bima collection and accompanies the Ethic as a Root installation. The book contains a letter to my mother and a poem about ethics, and I will read you the following excerpt from the poem. It is not easy to be a root. Roots hold earth together, resisting erosion. Roots channel sustenance into the body of the plant. A root is not as powerful as water, nor does it need to be. It is a remarkable quality to be breakable, yet choose to hold ground. This is an ethic. The ethos that I have established in my printmaking extends to how I work as a public artist in the community. I'll start with an example of one of my favorite community partners to work with. Bayview Foundation is an affordable housing residence representing over 14 nationalities just across the street from the University of Wisconsin. Yet despite being so close to the university, the pedestrian infrastructure for the Bayview neighborhood residents is significantly more lacking. My first project with Bayview was with a group of 12 paid youth apprentices who lived in this neighborhood. And during the summer-long project, I instructed the students to collect meaningful imagery from their families and neighbors, and then to design their own repeating patterns inspired by their community. I then digitized the students' designs and turned them into this 300-foot-long banner that wraps around the neighborhood. The banner cultivated pride in the community and helped put Bayview on the map as they negotiated with the City of Madison for better pedestrian infrastructure and funding to expand affordable housing options. One of the things that I loved about this project was that the students got paid to be a part of it. At the conclusion of the project, Bayview also paid the students a royalty fee to use the imagery in marketing materials and fundraising for the nonprofit. The Youth Apprenticeship Program was a chance to recognize the talent of the students who live in Bayview and that they are a demographic that does not traditionally pursue art school. The students' designs have since been licensed for use as a part of a capital campaign to expand Bayview's affordable housing options, to support seniors who wish to age in place in the neighborhood, and to build a new community arts center. And so these are all examples of how money generated from the arts can go directly towards community benefit, while also teaching young people about the value of their work and creativity. In another project called Bayview Portraits, I collaborated with photographer Jenie Gao on the collection of oral histories. I was the interviewer, editor, writer, and book designer, and Jamie took the portraits. First and foremost, we framed this project as a gift to the interviewees, in which they had no obligation to us in order to accept the gift. Many of Bayview's residents are first-generation immigrants and refugees who have never shared their stories with even their own families, and so this was a chance to record and document their stories. The oral histories and the portraits all belong to the families, not to us as the artists, and not even to the foundation that commissioned them. We built an agreement in which the families chose what permissions to give to us as the artists and to the neighborhood foundation. The residents did not have to be in the book in order to use our service, and this is an important aspect of my work, being clear about whose rights need to be protected in which situation. And so, for instance, when I, as an artist, am working with an institution, I ensure that my rights are protected. When working with community, particularly those that are marginalized, it's the people's rights that need to be centered. And so total for this project, we worked with 40 families and 32 chose to be in the final book. This brings us to the question of what artists can and cannot do. I served as an artist in residence with the City of Vancouver's Parks and Recreation program, Decolonization, Arts and Culture. For 4 months, I worked alongside elders in residence Mar Dorvalt and Les Nelson. I facilitated arts workshops in Andy Livingston Park for anyone from the people who live in the park to the children who attended the school nearby. The residency provided different forms of support to the vulnerable populations, such as food, water bottles, masks, heat guides during the fire and smoke season in Vancouver summer months. By the end of the residency, I collected over 100 community drawings, and I turned about 25 of them into a repeated design that got printed on community blankets. And we gave away over 80 of these blankets at the closing event for the residency. And a lot of good came of this residency. We used city resources to distribute supplies for the community through an art project. We provided arts programming and Indigenous elder support to different people that used the park. We created a space where people from different demographics interacted and got to know one another as neighbors. And there are, of course, limitations with this programming. Art may provide a salve, but community artists alone will not stop the daily terror that unhoused people are subjugated to. when city police conduct street sweeps and seize their belongings. I would not be surprised if some of the community blankets that we gave away during this project are now in a warehouse where Vancouver police have seized the belongings of unhoused people and keep them where they can no longer access them. And so one of the things I'm conscious of as an artist who does community work is how artists get oversold as a solution to systemic problems, especially when we are working with modest budgets that are a fraction of what the city may be spending on other things like policing the unhoused. What we need is for cities to invest first and foremost in solutions to help people get housed. The housing crisis is not inevitable. And there's a myth that unhoused people migrate to temperate climates, and so you see more of them in warmer cities. But where I live in Vancouver, the majority of unhoused people are Indigenous, meaning they've lived there longer than any of the rest of us. So what do we need to do to restore housing justice for people whose lives have been disrupted by ongoing colonization, including in the form of gentrification? Understanding the limits of the arts, how do we more meaningfully support artists and community members in the use of art for shared public spaces? In 2022, I won a public art commission for the Metro Transit System in Madison, Wisconsin. To create my winning proposal, I focused on conducting interviews with primarily BIPOC bus riders because of a gap that I identified in the official city surveys of transit ridership. In Madison's most recent 2019 survey of public transit, 84% of those surveyed were white, which did not match the high diversity of transit riders. From these interviews, I created an art proposal entitled The Time Is Ours, which portrayed the passage of time in the city from the perspective of the bus riders that I interviewed. Each section of the artwork has subtle but distinct signifiers of life in the northern Midwest, including the first spring crocuses, buzzing cicadas, migrating geese, and the first snowfall. The concept is a nod to the sentiment that many bus riders shared with me, even those with the longest commutes, that when they're in transit, that time belongs to them. They can read, listen to music, gaze out the window. The time is there to do as they choose. For many people, having access to transit means having independence. The physical layers of the artwork are a nod to my printmaking background and the founding principles of my practice. The Time Is Ours is composed of 2 layers, the painted mural wall and CNC-cut aluminum silhouettes floated away from the wall to create depth. In designing for this site, I took note of the fact that the Madison Metro building occupies 1 full block of East Washington Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare that brings 55,000 people per day into the Capitol Square. The avenue is what's known as a strode, or the cross between a street meant for pedestrians and also a road that functions for car traffic into the city. The rapid gentrification along this strode is turning the area into a concrete desert. In my site visits, I noticed that the Metro building is one of the few blocks where the architecture is set far enough back from the street that there's a grassy and treed oasis. And so I designed my artwork to avoid mature tree coverage and preserve this green space as much as possible. It's worth noting that of the 4 finalists for this project, I was the only one who was not white, which is an indication of the many barriers for artists of color to compete for larger scale public art commissions. But because of the work I have done at the grassroots level, people of the Madison community were willing to share their stories with me and take time to petition the city to select me as the artist for this commission. During the selection process, the City of Madison collected public feedback via an online form. There was a massive outpour of responses, and there are 77 pages of community comments that are publicly available on the city's website that almost unanimously support my proposal as the winner. Additionally, without my prompting, another community member, artist and activist Nipinet Lansam, created an online guide and step-by-step instructions to help people navigate the city forums to submit feedback. And so Nipinet's labor made engaging in the civic process much easier for a lot of people. And these testimonies have become a living archive of the public's attentiveness to the ethics of artists and the city committees that make decisions for urban planning. People pay attention. People of all backgrounds care about city planning and the cultural ethos embodied by public art. What the people of Madison demonstrated was that they had a level of trust that can only be built over time. And so people knew me from my work with Bayview and from my long-term advocacy work. And so I might not have had the same resources as some of my competitors. I am continually humbled and affirmed by the role of community in helping me to get where I am. I wish this were a wholly happy story, where I won the project and got to finish with 0 obstacles. But here's why. The City of Madison hired me with the Common Council's approval in 2022. They have since delayed the project until 2026. It took 18 months for the City of Madison to issue me a workable contract. Within a few days of me signing the contract, city staff withdrew the contract, citing problems with the building's wall facade. And so the building is now undergoing a full renovation that'll take until at least next year. And I'm glad that the building is getting renovated. I think it's going to be beautiful. I also wish that they'd done the inspection of the building before the public bid went out for the project, or during the 18 months while I was waiting for a contract, or the site visits that I did, or that any of my fabricators did when discussing with city staff what we're going to do for the installation. And so right now the project is in redesign limbo and continues to be delayed because of a few city staff that continue to reject each round of my revisions. And they're currently acting in opposition to the Public Art Committee that hired me and the democratic process through which I was selected, and the committees that have already unanimously approved of my updates as they currently stand, and whose approval normally carry authority. And so here's a non-exhaustive list of the changes and criteria that the city staff have requested of me. The budget will stay the same despite the project being delayed by 4 years. The artwork, however, cannot be smaller, despite the delays and budget constraints. City staff were unsure about mural paint directly on the wall and would prefer it to be on removable panels. City staff would prefer if more of the artwork were directly painted onto the wall with no removable mural panels. City staff have concerns about weight and wind load. They are worried that the aluminum silhouettes are too big and too heavy. City staff say that there have never been weight and wind load concerns. They want the aluminum silhouettes to be larger. The city staff's basis for rejecting my most recent revision is that they think it's too different from the original proposal. And the reason they've cited is that they want to make sure that other people know they're being equitable and that they have fully vetted me to prove that I truly deserve to have won this project. And the scenario that they're worried about is that a hypothetical artist will get jealous of me for getting to make revisions to this project and getting to finish with something that differs from what I originally proposed. Never mind that the changes that I've made are in response to the building itself changing. And you know, I find this all funny. I would love to know who is jealous of me, spending 4 years of my life dealing with this. And actually, I'm very jealous of this hypothetical artist that I've heard about so many times from the City of Madison. I would love to be treated as equitably as this hypothetical person that the city is protecting. And if there's any question about whether I deserve to be the winner, I've been approved as a vendor by every governing committee that's required, including the city's Common Council. I have met and exceeded every criteria that's been asked of me. And so this would be a good time to reference Toni Morrison, who writes, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, and you have to spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Somebody says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. Now I'm one of the lucky ones. I have an incredible support network of people who can give public art advice, legal advice, and more, not to mention everyone who showed up and gave those 77 pages of public testimony in support of my proposal. I have so many people fighting for me and helping me to stay in the game. And it is still so hard to get hired and to stay hired as a person of color. I share all this because right now in the US, DE&I programs are in crisis. But even with the anti-discriminatory policies that exist, there are still bad actors who misuse the term equity and use it as an excuse for micromanaging a hiring process. So how do we make sure that terms like equity are fulfilled in good faith? Why, with all the DE&I programs that have popped up since 2020, have we still not seen meaningful change in representation? What are the changes that we need to see in everyday people's sentiments and actions that cannot be written into policy? I think of Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., in relation to artists' agency over their own work. In 1982, Maya Lin was a 21-year-old college student when she beat 1,400 competitors, including her own professor at Yale, in a blind juried competition. The work she designed resembles a raised scar in the earth, inscribed with the names of dead soldiers who never returned home from the Vietnam War. It is not a monument to glorify war, but a memorial to acknowledge the dead. Lin had zero public art experience at that point, but she was supported with access to vendors and a fabrication team to fulfill her vision and artistic intent. Almost immediately, her work was controversial, with opponents going as far as to criticize why someone of Chinese descent was designing a memorial for American soldiers. As a Chinese-American artist and a woman, Maya Lin was incomprehensible to her critics. Yet she has arguably created one of the most enduring and successful public artworks to this day. But by the time Maya Lin's work received the acclaim that it deserved, the controversy of it had triggered the creation of what is today known as the design by committee process. As a public artist, I have sat at so many tables where I am interviewed by no fewer than 10 members of a selection committee, many of whom will continue to have decision-making power over what I make should I win the opportunity. I have also served on selection committees where dozens of people spend hours weighing in on who deserves awards as modest as a $1,000 grant. Even larger public art commissions are still fractions of the funding made available for much larger construction budgets that do not nearly have the same level of oversight. I cannot help but wonder, has all this extra oversight resulted in higher quality public art by a more diverse cohort of artists? What does it mean when we have heavier policing of artists and their designs while lacking scrutiny of the context into which we place the artwork? What would it mean to have more faith in artists? What would supportive policy writing and infrastructure look like? What would it look like to create conditions that support artists to create work that is not only beautiful, but also critical and substantial? Art that can change our minds and our hearts. Let's talk about tech and cultural literacy. In the last couple weeks, the company OpenAI, which created ChatGPT, released a Ghibli generator, which makes AI-generated images that are inspired by the artworks of Studio Ghibli. The generator has been met with heavy community backlash. Opponents of AI see this as the AI companies making a direct attack on Studio Ghibli's founder, Hayao Miyazaki, who has publicly rebuked AI and refuses to see computer-generated imagery at his animation studio. And for the record, AI-generated imagery is theft and copyright violation. And this is not up for debate. If you want proof of this, try getting ChatGPT to make art inspired by Pablo Picasso. You cannot, because it does not align with the company's content policy. In other words, the foundations with a vested interest in Picasso's work have protected the value of the assets. And this is where we need to pay attention. What assets are protected from AI extraction when people's creative labor is vulnerable to it? This is the only AI-generated image that I will show in this presentation, which the official White House Instagram page shared 1 week ago, of an ICE agent detaining an undocumented immigrant while she wept. There is a real photo of the ICE agent making this arrest, and this meme is the cover photo that the White House chose to post. Again, this is the official White House Instagram page. This is not satire. This is tech fascism, in which the oligarchs in power are using AI technology to memify and minimize the very real horrors of this administration. Miyazaki and the animators at Studio Ghibli are known for maintaining a high level of artistic integrity in the telling of stories that at their core are anti-fascist. So what is this moment we are in, where an AI company has stolen Ghibli's style, stripped it of its substance and its ethos, and used it to aestheticize and trivialize the violence of a fascist government? My latest negotiation table is entitled Cycle Breaking and Making. I have used printmaking to reclaim a Chippendale table, which is a furniture style attributed to British furniture maker Thomas Chippendale, and an aesthetic that defined British, French, and American colonial tastes. But the Chippendale is an appropriation of Chinese Ming and Tang Dynasty furniture. The popularity of this furniture style and of Asian goods arose around the time that European nations began funding expeditions in search of a shorter route to Asia. Every westward expansion project, the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Trans-Pacific Railroad, the Panama Canal, has shared this same goal of finding a shorter route to the Pacific. In other words, Europeans' obsession with Asia is inextricable from their westward expansion and colonization of what we today know as the Americas. The Chippendale table is simultaneously the style of table that the Founding Fathers would have congregated around in Thomas Jefferson's Monticello home, and an image of domesticity from the 1960s dining room. This is the kind of table around which the Founding Fathers and American revolutionaries had tea time, where they drank Darjeeling tea imported from India out of fine china. This is the same tea that white American revolutionaries, disguised as Native Americans, dumped into the Boston Harbor in protest of the British government for taxing and regulating their access to foreign goods. I have cut into the stolen table design and made an indelible mark to connect the local and global stories of imperialism. The wood blocks embedded in the table depict two birds, the mythological feng huang and the homing pigeon. Historically, in Chinese mythology, feng and huang were depicted separately for the male and female birds, but the masculine and feminine merged over time, and eventually the feng huang came to represent the empress and the feminine as Chinese clans shifted from nomadic and egalitarian towards a patriarchal society. But both masculine and feminine powers remain embedded within the identity of feng huang. According to myth, the feng huang disappears during times of political corruption and only reappears before humans following a transition to new leadership and an era of peace and justice. Is a bird that I grew up raising with my dad. My dad was in the 7th grade when all of China's schools shut down during the Cultural Revolution. His former educators endured public beatings, imprisonment, or worse. While the schools were closed, my dad turned to raising pigeons. Decades later, after immigrating to the US, my dad would find white men who kept homing pigeons for competitive racing and discarded the older birds. My dad and I kept 2 pigeon coops, one for the retired birds and one for their offspring. It is almost impossible to rehome a homing pigeon that has identified its home site. Even a pigeon with a new mate and life will fly hundreds of miles towards a memory of home. There they will die rather than seek shelter elsewhere. So we kept the retired birds caged, and only their offspring flew free in a land their parents would never recognize. People would ask my dad, would he ever competitively race the birds? He said no. He only wanted to watch them fly. For a long time, I have felt a resonance with the pigeon and seen them as an emblem of diaspora and class strife. Pigeons live on almost every continent and yet are not considered invasive because they have not harmed the ecosystems they have been introduced to. Historically, royalty and the upper class kept doves as pets, but domestic doves lost their utility to people, and the feral doves that now populate our city streets earned the stigmatized name of pigeon. Beyond semantics, what is the difference between the white dove that symbolizes peace and the colored pigeon that flies into fire, delivering messages of safety to those trapped by war? The homing pigeon and feng huang are positioned so that their combined image moves cyclically, with no top or bottom. Even in tension, social systems only work when individuals move collectively. The finished woodblocks rest in the surface of a reclaimed table. The blocks sit flushed inside the table and resemble inlaid jade. Shanxi, my father's province, means Western Mountain. It is not lost on me that I have come to do this work surrounded by the Western Mountains of Turtle Island, near one of the largest jade deposits on the earth outside of Southeast Asia and Taiwan. While this is not my land, I hope this gesture is significant as an act of care to connect a diaspora across a local and global context. Distance has not made me forget. This brings us to the question of what and how we remember and the role of archives. So this is not my project, but it's one that I respect tremendously, and I recommend those of you here to write down Forward Truth's website and review this archive as a case study for institutional accountability. And they also have all of this on Instagram for those on social media. In 2022, the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art was the subject of a public scandal. Forward Truth, a collective of Black women, femme, and gender nonconforming artists, led a several months-long protest of IMOCA for their repeated failures to keep the artists and their artwork safe during the Wisconsin Triennial exhibition. The 2022 Triennial, entitled Ain't I a Woman, curated by Fatima Laster, was the first museum exhibit in Wisconsin to showcase entirely Black women, femme, and gender nonconforming artists. But what should have been a historic celebration has been riddled with controversy. Incidents have included a white staff member assaulting a Black woman artist and damage and theft of artwork during the exhibition. By the end of the triennial, over half of the 23 artists had withdrawn their work. Now, 3 years later, IMOCA is opening the next triennial exhibition. The museum leadership's public stance, when asked about the controversy, is that they want people to remember that they are a contemporary art museum focused only on art that speaks to right now. But they have also admitted that in this year's triennial, there are no Black women. So it's IMOCA's implication that Black women are not contemporary artists. How do we, in the arts and culture sector, speak to what's happening right now, culturally and politically, without Black women? It's important to note that while the IMOCA Triennial has become a case study of what can go wrong, given a different handling of the same situation, it could have also been a teaching moment for how to admit to mistakes, make amends, and rebuild trust after conflict. The Forward Truth artists in the aftermath have maintained an incredible living archive, not just of what happened, but also of viable solutions for repair. These are the models that museums and cultural institutions will need as we enter into an intense political climate in which the current administration is ordering arts institutions to forgo DE&I initiatives or risk losing federal funding. The question now is, what will historical archives reveal of the work shown in museum spaces during this era? What will institutions do to demonstrate to their communities that, yes, we can trust you, not just when diversity is trendy, but when it's something we have to fight for? Community is everything, and institutions need community support now more than ever. Community is how we will all survive. With that acknowledgement, I'd like to talk about collecting and what it means to steward objects and keep them alive in the context of the archive. I had my first museum exhibition in 2018. Since then, I have had work in several different museum exhibitions, but my earlier museum shows did not result in acquisitions. Private collectors have been buying my work for more than a decade since I was an undergraduate student, but it's only recently that public institutions have started buying my work. In just the last 6 months, over 30 public collections have acquired my work. These collections include Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia, UPenn, Princeton, Cornell, Brown, the Library of Congress, BEMA, thank you, and many others that have suddenly chosen to invest in my work. And what's especially interesting is that even with this surge of institutions buying my work in this last 6 months, last year, the people contacting me are sometimes curators, and very often they are also librarians. The acquisitions have not slowed down since the election. Even in this moment of political crisis that we are witnessing, public institutions are still buying my work. I want to share a moment that moved me. A university in the Deep South recently bought my artwork in 3 different departments pooled money from separate budgets and foundations in order to do this. Critical race theory and DE&I have been banned for a while now in the southern states, even if we're only now contending with this nationally. And so what this exemplifies is that while of course policy is important, there are behaviors and actions that cannot be written into policy. What does it mean for people to do the right thing, regardless of what the law requires of them? And so I just want to give a shout out to all the art librarians who have often been the first ones to open the door for me to the most prestigious places. They're the ones making sure that my work is not just getting shown, but also getting archived and taught, all while copying other curators on their emails. For years now, professors have been citing my online essays, and today I'm so glad to be able to say that many of them at public institutions across the country can also show my work in person to their students as a part of their pedagogy. And so here's a summary of the collecting history of my work. First, people in the community started buying my work. From the community, I got my first private collectors who have been supporting my practice since my early 20s. My collectors have included arts patrons who can buy large original artworks, and also everyday people who maybe have $100 or less to spend on a print. Then, because of my long-term community work, the libraries at prestigious universities found out about me. Librarians opened the door, and thanks to the librarians, even the museums that already knew about me and maybe showed me, but didn't buy my work before, are beginning to see me differently. But I've been here the whole time, and the community has known that for years. And even here, it is not lost on me that the DogEar Festival is for artist books and printmaking, and that it was people in book arts who so kindly brought me here to speak with you today. And I'm going to keep saying this. Community is how we connect. Community is how we all will survive. Which brings me to what I'm working on right now, the next piece in the negotiation table series. This piece features a circular woodblock embedded in the surface of a Lazy Susan. Here you can see the Lazy Susan base that I've built for the woodblock that will be embedded into it. This piece is based on one of my mother's childhood stories of growing up in Taiwan. My mother tells me that when she was a small child, her family rented her a bedroom on the third floor of their landlord's building, separate from their first floor flat. These old Taiwanese buildings are constructed directly into the mountainside. So to get to her bedroom, my mom would need to go outside and ascend the staircase directly into the mountain. Every night, my mother would ascend into the mountains under the watchful eyes of mountain lions. Now, I've since confirmed that the lions of my mother's childhood were in fact feral cats. But I love that this is a story of her innate courage and ability to face things alone. I also want this to be a story where, while yes, there are times when we need to stand on our own, there is also a chance for us to return to belonging and community. I've surrounded the mountain cats with rabbits, our family's primary zodiac sign, and plants that have grown around my mom's home in rural Kansas. I have placed them in this cyclical chase in the face of encroaching suburban development, and all those who would threaten to displace my mother when she has withstood the forces of diaspora and removal time and time again. I am further contextualizing this work in the Lazy Susan, which gained prominence in Chinese American and other Asian American restaurants starting in the 1960s, after the end of the Chinese Exclusion Act and Taiwan Magnuson Act. A takeout restaurant was my family's path to chain migration, their first economic stepping stone, and my first art studio. The Lazy Susan table is an example of the imagination of the oppressed, an innovation that only came to be following contact with Europeans, but which undeniably is a cultural phenomenon that belongs to diasporic peoples of Asian descent. Other examples of this type of innovation following colonial contact include Taiwanese boba tea, Vietnamese banh mi, native beadwork, Black American jazz. This inventiveness is an act of resistance against assimilation, an expression of cultures that are alive and ever evolving in the context of Western colonialism. Which brings me to the role of place and community in the making of the work itself. I started making this woodcut at a residency named Moss House, which is hosted by the Shinnecock Nation in Southampton, New York. From there, I ascended into the mountains, like my mother did all those years ago, and carved this woodblock at the Empire of Dirt residency on Kootenasha land in Creston, BC. I am now completing this woodcut at a third residency at Burnaby Art Gallery, where I share this work at open studio events and bring the stories back into the context of community. With that, I return to the question that I opened with. Is it possible to create ethical and honest work in the context of colonial systems, in a nation built on the foundation of enslavement, exploitation, and stolen land? If creativity is indeed necessary for our survival, then what will genuine reclamation of our authorship require? I believe part of that answer is that, again, community is how we will all survive. When we set our intentions for art projects, curatorial work, institutional collecting, who benefits from the work? Is it solely the production of the stuff that's important? Is it ownership of the stuff that matters most? Or is it the way that work represents the people who made it? What about the people who are the creators? What does it look like to love people more than the things that they create? What kind of creativity will we encourage in our communities if we see creativity not as a product or an output, but as proof that we are alive? And that because we are alive, we and the beings we share this planet with deserve to exist and deserve to live well in the world that we helped to create. If this can be the ethos that guides us, what will our creativity be in service of then? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was incredible and really moving. I wanted to ask you one question and ask our audience if they have any questions. You have mentored 25 emerging artists, and I'm really curious about that part of your practice and how that's been, how you do that.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is just that recognizing, having gone through art school, that art school is terrific about teaching you the techniques, but not necessarily about what it means to maintain your practice and really to be a business owner and professional to make it in this field. There's such a high attrition rate in the arts, and especially for anybody who comes from marginalized background, whether that's by gender or race or the social class that you were born into. And so I knew when I started my business that when I had the capacity, I wanted to be able to incorporate an apprenticeship program and mentorship into that. A lot of the interns that I've hired come through universities, and so when I lived in Madison, through the University of Wisconsin, and also through some of the community colleges, and people who just reached out to me in the community. And I had a student who was from Illinois, was going to Tufts University and was back in the Midwest for the summer, and cold emailed me and sent me their resume and information, and ended up being one of the students that interned for me. And so the way that I structure it into my work is to think about what are the pieces that cannot happen without me. Like this is still Jenie Gao Studio, and so what are the works that cannot happen without me? But what can I break down and use as a teaching opportunity for somebody else? And so being able to lay out the project management and to be able to teach younger artists, emerging artists about that process. And I generally split the time between the time that I teach people, just the day-to-day operations, what I need them to help me with to make sure that the work gets done. And then also time that's just educational. And so I'll take a day out of the week and sit down with my interns and apprentices and walk them through one of my contracts and teach them how to read a contract. I'll have a day where we just walk through the studio, and I ask them questions, and I ask them to ask me questions about, well, why do you think I chose to lay out the space in this particular way, and how does this help me or help other people be able to move through and work efficiently and work safely? And so I just, it's something that I knew that I wanted, and then a few years into my business, made sure that I was able to incorporate budget-wise with any of the projects that I was working on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions out here? Just raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone if you want to ask. Celine.
I'm curious, when you said your business was an anti-gentrification business, what that means. Is that public projects or private projects, or what is an anti-gentrification business?
Yeah. So I do a mix of projects both for private and public clients. But in terms of why I frame my business as anti-gentrification, it's about the practices that I go into the community with. And so when I made the decision 10 years ago to quit my corporate job and see if I could make a go of being a full-time artist, one of the things I asked myself was, how do I do this? Not just to become a full-time artist, but how do I do this in a way that feels consistent with my values? Because it felt pointless to me to build an arts business that was just complicit in the same things that I was trying to get away from at any of my previous jobs in, say, like a corporate setting. And so I just try to be really intentional about things like when I do negotiate contracts with a particular client and think about what do I need to make sure to make sure that I'm paid appropriately, that I have the budget to hire the help that I need, that the intellectual property and copyright terms are all outlined very clearly, and in a way that's also educational and in partnership with who I'm working with. I also understand that my clients are not artists, and so they're not going to know these things, and we're not in a society that really teaches people what it means to work on things that are custom, right? We're in a culture that buys things off of Amazon, and so people don't know what it means to buy an original work of art. And so I build that into my practice. And sometimes it means that things are slower. And I think a lot of times people feel the pressure to just sign contracts and get it done and just move on to the next thing. And so I just say, let's slow down this process. And in the long run, that's going to be better for us. Let's negotiate these terms and make sure that this partnership feels fair and is something that we can continue to build in the long term. Things like building in ways that I can be spending money from a project on the local economy. That's a way of acting against gentrification. So just every layer of the practice is how is this actually benefiting people rather than being complicit in the same systems.
That was a great question. Any more? Anyone else? Well, we're going to have a little reception out here in the bistro, and you can ask Jenie more questions then. And Elizabeth will be there. I'll be there. You'll all be there. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Jenny.